All right, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for everyone who's here on a Friday afternoon. As was mentioned, my name is Michelle Keba Knecht. I'm the Senior Medical Librarian at the Charles E. Schmidt College of Medicine at Florida Atlantic University. And today I'm going to be going over an exploratory mixed method study that I did. We looked at curiosity during the research process. So in my session, going to be going over a brief introduction to the study, how it was designed, a little bit about my data analysis, some implications, and then we'll have time at the end for questions. I know that everybody might be coming to this for different reasons, but I do want you to get something out of the presentation. So if you're interested in conducting research, I want to walk through the steps of how to conduct a research study, what I did in case you're interested in replicating a study or if you're interested in conducting research. But if you're not interested in research at all, I do want to also give you some practical tips that you can use in your instructional practices. So in that implications section, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I learned through my research, but also some tips from some other librarians that have looked at curiosity and using curiosity while teaching information literacy to students. So I hope that sounds good to you. I am looking at the chat on the side, so I might be able to see your chats coming in, but I know that our wonderful moderators will also be gathering any questions you have as we go through the presentation. So if you do have any questions about anything I'm sharing, please feel free to put them in the chat or perhaps the Q&A section, whatever they prefer. Okay. So as an introduction, I started this project through the Institute for Research Design and Librarianship. And that was a wonderful experience. It really helped me feel more confident in my research abilities. I had done a little bit as an undergraduate student. I was an anthropology major, so I had studied a little bit about qualitative research, but I definitely needed a refresher. There's other research institutes in case you're interested in doing research. There's one through the Medical Library Association, and there's lots of courses that are free on Coursera, especially related to statistics. So maybe if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by quantitative research or statistics, there's a lot of learning resources out there for you. And part of the reason why I applied for the Institute for Research Design and Librarianship is I was really interested or curious about curiosity. The Institute was something I was interested in, but until I had an idea that I was excited about, I wasn't quite ready to apply. But the more I thought about it, the more I was interested in exploring the role of curiosity and what role that plays during the research process. And at the time, I was working with non-traditional undergraduate students, so I decided to study curiosity specifically within that student population. And as I started to think about my research study, of course, I started with a literature review. And that only made me more curious because the research was unclear. Some research pointed to using curiosity as a student motivator. We were wondering, does researching a topic about which they're curious motivate students? But other research, which you've probably heard of before, talks about the negative affective motions that students experience when they're researching. If they're researching a topic they're unfamiliar with, sometimes they struggle with feelings of doubt or confusion or frustration. And sometimes students may even choose a topic that they've already researched before or they know about to mitigate those feelings of frustration or doubt when they're having trouble researching. So I really wanted to learn more. This was exploratory. I wasn't already confirming a theory that was out there, but I wanted to learn more about the role that curiosity plays. So with that, I ended up with 3 research questions that I tried to answer with my study. 2 of them I looked at quantitatively, and 1 I looked at qualitatively. So that's how it ended up being a mixed method study. I was interested in empirical numbers to demonstrate the relationship between curiosity and information literacy. But at the same time, I love qualitative research, and I wanted to get a fuller picture of what the students were experiencing in their own words. So my first research question was, do students who score at a high level on the epistemic curiosity questionnaire also score higher on the information literacy self-efficacy scale? And I'll tell you a little bit more about those scales and questionnaires once we get to the methods section. But basically, question 1, I was looking at epistemic curiosity compared to information literacy self-efficacy. Research question 2, do students who score at a high level on the epistemic curiosity questionnaire also score higher on their annotated bibliographies as rated on the information literacy value rubric? So here I was looking at epistemic curiosity as compared to scores on annotated bibliographies that the students wrote. And then research question 3, my qualitative question, was how do students describe their feelings of epistemic curiosity as they relate to the research process? So I have my research questions. I'm doing a mixed method study. I have quantitative and qualitative data that I'm going to be collecting. How did I design it? The first thing I want to talk about is my study population. My study was made up of evening and online non-traditional undergraduate students. Those are typically students that are over 26 years of age, usually working full-time. That's why they might choose to do evening or online classes. I conducted the study during the fall 2018 and spring 2019 semesters of an 8-week required academic research techniques course. That was a full course for them. They had courses in 8-week blocks. And then as the culminating project for their course, they completed an annotated bibliography on a topic of their choice. The study was made up of a census of all students enrolled in the course, which ended up being 59 students, and that was a 97% response rate. So 97% of the students enrolled in fall or spring decided to take part in the study. As I mentioned, this was an exploratory mixed method study. There wasn't a prearranged theory about curiosity that was trying to validate. I was just trying to explore and see what was out there to add to the knowledge. And it was mixed methods because it had both quantitative and qualitative research questions. And I do want to point out that it's very important that it was approved by the university's Institutional Review Board. If you're planning to conduct a research study and present on it or have a poster or a publication, you need to make sure you receive approval from your institution's Institutional Review Board. And as part of that, you will get informed consent from your research participants where they consent to being a part of the research study. So my data sources included 3 different areas: a survey, which I conducted after students received information literacy instruction, and that information literacy instruction was performed by a different librarian so that I wouldn't bias any of the participants. I was solely the researcher, not acting as the librarian for the course. Annotated bibliographies, which were written as a student's final project for the course, and in-depth interviews. So just to go a little bit more in depth into my data collection instruments, the survey that I've mentioned that was given halfway through the course had some demographic questions, and it was also comprised of 2 validated scales. The first one that I mentioned, the epistemic curiosity questionnaire, measured students' epistemic curiosity. And epistemic curiosity, there's lots of different types of curiosity. It's the one that focuses on knowledge and the need to know, the need to fill an information gap. So to me, that seemed to relate the most to that kind of curiosity that we feel as we start to research. The other part of the survey consisted of the information literacy self-efficacy scale, which measures students' beliefs and their abilities of their information literacy. So it doesn't measure their ability directly, but it measures how they feel about how information literate they are. And I was interested in this feeling or affective component because remember I mentioned that I wasn't sure from the beginning what role curiosity played on their emotions as well. So I thought it would be interesting to see the relationship between epistemic curiosity and their information literacy self-efficacy. Another piece that I collected was the annotated bibliography. And that one I rated each bibliography on the Association of American Colleges and Universities Information Literacy Value rubric. And that rubric moved more towards rating their ability, their information literacy abilities, because the rubric has a set of sort of standards that you look for in order to for a student to be considered information literate. And then the last thing I did was in-depth interviews with 24 of the students. Of the students that participated, 24 were interested in going into a more in-depth interview. So I did that as well. Okay. So the data analysis portion. For the quantitative data, I used linear regression analysis using Microsoft Excel's analysis toolpack add-in. And I do want to mention, this being kind of my first major research project as a librarian, I did not have a budget for this, unfortunately. So all of these tools were free. If you're in the same situation, maybe you're at a smaller university where you don't already have some of the paid research tools, both of these were things that I used with no budget. I do recommend, as far as the statistical analysis goes, to make sure you're at least comfortable enough with statistics to understand the results you're getting and to understand the tests that need to be run. For this particular one, I did have a friend who was a statistician who helped me run the test, but I did feel comfortable from studying statistics, doing some Coursera courses and things like that, to make sure I kind of had a basic understanding there. Okay, and then qualitative. I did inductive coding and applied thematic analysis using QDA Minor Lite. Again, QDA Minor Lite is a free tool that you can use. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles of some of the paid ones, but it was good enough to get me going. And with inductive coding and applied thematic analysis, basically what you're doing is you're reading through your interview transcripts and you're looking to see repeated patterns, I guess is a way you could say it. And specifically with inductive coding, you create your codes as you're reading through the data. So as you start to see patterns emerging, you come up with a code, which would be a name to label that. And you create a code book where you have a definition for the code, and you have examples of like example phrases of the code and what the code is not. It's kind of a fun process. And then as you have your codes, you start to see which ones emerge as themes, the ones that you're seeing the most. So in the presentation today, I'll talk about some of the themes that emerged from the qualitative data. Okay. And I see some people putting some helpful tools in the chat, so that's great. Thanks for sharing those. All right, so research question 1, what were the results? What did I find? So research question 1 was, do students who score at a high level on the epistemic curiosity questionnaire also score higher on the information literacy self-efficacy scale? And I should mention that the epistemic curiosity questionnaire is actually broken down into 2 subscales, I-type and D-type curiosity. So I-type stands for interest type, and that's when you feel motivated because you're interested in the subject, you're excited to learn about it. D-type is deprivation type. So that's still curiosity, but it's filled by that kind of like annoyed feeling when you don't know the answer and you just need to fill that information gap. You feel deprived of the information. So both types of epistemic curiosity, but they're rated a little bit differently. They have different questions on the scale. So I did analyze them separately. And what you're seeing in these charts is the orange squares are the predicted information literacy self-efficacy scores based on the linear regression model. The blue diamonds are the actual plotted points, the points that I received from the students. So you can see here there's a slight upward trend for both I-type and D-type. This information was statistically significant. The p-value was less than 0.01, but the effect was relatively small. The R-squared for our I-type was 0.18, which means that I-type curiosity explains about 18% of the variability in information literacy self-efficacy, and D-type explains about 17% of the variability in information literacy self-efficacy. Keep in mind, my sample size was small and it was only at 1 university, so can't necessarily generalize this to everyone else, but some interesting preliminary findings. For research question 2, that's where I was looking at epistemic curiosity compared to their scores on their annotated bibliographies. Here, there was no relationship. You can see the p-values are much higher. They were greater than 0.01, much greater. So it's possible that these were just statistically random. The R-squares are really showing that there's no relationship here. And when you look at it, they're kind of all over the place. The line's not really showing any trend. So I did not find a relationship between epistemic curiosity and their scores on their annotated bibliographies. But again, this is a small sample size, 1 school, so not sure how generalizable that will be. For research question 3, this was my qualitative question. How do students describe their feelings of epistemic curiosity as they relate to the research process? Through my thematic analysis, I really found these 3 themes coming up. and they're kind of connected. So I'm going to go through them with you. The first was personal connection to the research topic. Almost every student that I interviewed talked about the importance of having a personal connection to their topic. And that personal connection varied. For some people, it was related to their interests or something that had to do with their family or their friends. For other people, it related to the vocation that they were interested in or their major. But all of them felt some sort of personal connection to the topic. And once they felt this personal connection, a lot of them talked about digging deeper in order to satisfy that curiosity that came up through their personal connection. So I had students talking about losing track of time, going down rabbit holes, wanting to keep investigating the topic even after the course was over. But a very key piece at the end here was professor guidance to refine their thesis statement. So they did talk about how it was really important for their professor to directly guide them and give them feedback and turn that curiosity into something that could actually be researched. Without that, they expressed feelings of not knowing, being unsure. So those three themes came together in order to help them succeed in the course. One of the things I love about qualitative research is that we can share quotes from the participants. So I just want to share a couple with you. Regarding personal connection, one person said, "I found the more I researched, the more curious I got. And as I was unraveling all these, the more curious I got as I was unraveling all these different layers. If it was a subject that I wasn't passionate about or personally associated with, or if we had been given the research topic and it's not something I could draw any parallels with, I think it would have been a lot harder, and obviously my curiosity wouldn't have been as heightened and probably wouldn't have been satisfied." For digging deeper, one person said, "After I found a certain article, I was like, what? I didn't know that. Then I was like, not even doing my assignment. I was just reading and not worried about my assignment because it became so interesting to me." And another person said, "I just didn't realize how involved researching could be. I never knew that I could dwell all that deep. Although I thought I had been researching deeply, I realized I could take it a step deeper." And then lastly, regarding the professor guidance, one person said, "My actual original thesis statement was, let's talk about the government shutdown. That's what I thought a thesis statement was. That was my question." So right off the bat, she's like, "That's not a thesis statement." So I had to be guided on how to formulate a better thesis because I did not understand, to be honest. So what are some implications or what are some tips that you could use in your own instructional practice based on what I found and also what I've read through the literature review that I conducted as I started the research study? Specifically from what worked for this professor, she had them brainstorming interests. It was a semester-long course, so she had enough time to really devote to the research process. But she had them brainstorm interests. She also had them reviewing newspapers for current events. And along with that, I heard this great idea at a conference that I was at. It's called The Perch, and that's at the University of Iowa. I don't know if any participants here today are at the University of Iowa, but it was really interesting when I heard about it because what they did was they set up an area with periodicals that they could bring classes to, or perhaps they could bring it to classes. Not quite sure how it worked, especially during COVID. But if you click on the link in my presentation, you can see more information about it. And it seemed like a great way to kind of generate curiosity and interesting topics. The other thing that I thought was really important from the study was encouraging students to explore their curiosity, but offering them guidance and support. We can tell students to, research something you're curious about, but they can be left feeling unsure if they don't have that guidance in how to harness that curiosity and translate it into something that's a researchable thesis statement. If you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend reading this article from Rimpel and Dietering that was published in the Library with the Lead Pipe. I saw a presentation that they gave, I guess several years ago now, that made me interested in curiosity and using curiosity in information literacy instruction. They have a lot of great tips in here. Just to quickly summarize some of the things that they are interested in. They suggested adopting the language of curiosity and exploration. So they suggest using the term curious instead of passionate, telling students to research something you're curious about as opposed to passionate about takes off some of the pressure. If they're already passionate about something, they might already have preconceived notions. They might not be open to all sides. They also talk about learning and exploring as opposed to finding sources. So even just some of the words that you can use can change the way you and your students think about doing research. They also encourage early exploration of different sources. They had some really great ideas in their article. They had students looking at press releases from the university to see what current research was being done. They created a Google map of different researchers around campus and the projects they've been working on. And they worked with the students to make sure they were choosing topics that could be reflected in journals. And then lastly, they encourage students to self-reflect on curiosity. And in their article, they even have a self-test that students can take to think on and reflect about their curiosity. So for future research, I think that investigating the role curiosity plays in the research process as a state rather than as a trait would be really interesting. The epistemic curiosity questionnaire measures curiosity as an innate trait within someone's personality. But I think that related to research, curiosity could change depending on the topic and things like that. So I think researching it as a state would be interesting. Utilizing a larger sample size of study participants across multiple universities would, of course, help with generalizability. Expanding the study to include additional student populations, including traditional and undergraduate students. And then I'd be really interested about evaluating the effect of curiosity building exercises on student engagement with research projects and papers. So not just their baseline curiosity, but how their curiosity may change as a result of an exercise or an information literacy session. So I hope you enjoyed the session. We'll just see if anybody has any questions.
Looks like there's one question from Julie Hornick asking if you have any tips for curiosity building exercises.
Hey, Julie, that's a great question. You may have asked this before I shared some of the ones from the article. Let's see. I think if you're focused on building curiosity, taking a look at the article that I mentioned and having students do that kind of like self-test reflection could be a way to get them thinking and some metacognition around curiosity. I haven't, because in this research study, I was just studying it from a high level. I haven't implemented a lot myself, but I do encourage you to take a look at this and try out some of the things that they've talked about here. I hope that helps, Julie. Are there any other questions?
Doesn't look like it. If anyone has any further questions, can you put your email address in the chat?
So I have it here and I'll also type it into the chat.
Okay.
Make sure I have all panelists and attendees.
There is a second question in the chat and it says, can you talk about the coding? And then I will give you another one from the chat.
Okay, great. I wish I had a screenshot of what the coding looked like. I know people that will code by printing out the transcripts in paper and then having different colored highlighters to highlight things that they see repeated, things that keep coming up. What I liked about the software is you can kind of color code or highlight as you go, especially with inductive coding, which means you come up with the codes as you're doing it. There's people that are called lumpers and people that are called splitters. Some people make hundreds of codes and some people kind of lump codes together. So if you're ever coding with someone, you have to come to an agreement about what codes you're using. And that is the better practice. This project I worked only on my own, but it is a good practice to have co-authors so that you can calculate inter-rater reliability and make sure that something I think would be one code, other with people would think as well. So it's much easier when you can see it in front of you, but I hope that gives you a general idea of some coding. And the text that I used that the Institute for Research Design and Librarianship covers that talks about coding and applied thematic analysis is written by Greg Guest. And I think it's called applied thematic analysis. If I have a chance, I'll try to Google it and put it into the chat.
Cool.
And was there
Thank you
another
very-
question?
Oh.
Yes, in the chat, someone has asked, is there any indication as to whether students' curiosity increases during their college years?
So that's a really great question as well. And I think that gets into the trait versus state discussion as well. Right now, almost every validated questionnaire that measures curiosity, or at least epistemic curiosity, measures it as a trait. And traits don't normally change with year to year, maybe over a long span of time, but there's something that's more innate. I think that in order to really measure students' curiosity increasing or changing during college, we'll have to have new research looking at it more as a state. So I think that's an interesting new way to take it, but I haven't seen a lot out there yet about kind of changes in curiosity. Yeah, and coding is time consuming. I do like it. So for me, coding is interesting, but you definitely have to devote a lot of time to it. I prefer it to transcribing interviews. So coding to me is a little bit more fun than transcribing, but.
Sure. Well, thank you, Michelle. We appreciate your time.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.